A rancher gave a ride to an Apache widow and by tribal law had to marry her and stay with her. John Miller was used to a quiet, lonely life. His ranch stretched over miles of dry, dusty land in the southwest. The sun beat down during the day and the nights were cold and still. He had grown up here, the son of a rancher, learning to ride horses almost before he could walk. From dawn to dusk, his days were filled with tending the cattle, mending fences, and taking care of the land that had been in his family for generations. It was a hard life, but John loved it. There was a certain freedom in being out on the open land, where the horizon seemed endless and the sky could show every shade of color, from the soft pink of sunrise to the fiery orange of sunset. One particular afternoon, John was driving his old, creaking pickup along a winding dirt road that cut through the hills near his ranch. He liked these drives. They gave him time to think and notice things he might miss when he was busy on the ranch. The desert looked especially beautiful that day. The air was dry and warm, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and the sound of the wind whispering through the canyons. He had almost reached the small settlement where he sometimes traded supplies when he noticed something unusual ahead. A woman was struggling with a horse-drawn cart stuck on the side of the road. The horse was tired and the wheels of the cart were caught in a patch of soft sand. John slowed down and pulled over. From a distance, he could see her brushing sweat and dust from her brow, her hands raw from trying to free the cart. There was a quiet determination in the way she worked, but also an unmistakable sense of frustration and weariness. She seemed very much alone, except for the horse that pulled the cart and a few bundles of belongings piled on it. John hesitated for a moment. He wasn't used to stopping for strangers. Most people in these parts kept to themselves, and the desert could be unforgiving for anyone traveling alone. But something about her made him act. Maybe it was the look of exhaustion on her face or the dignity in her posture despite the struggle. He put the truck in gear and drove closer. "Need some help?" he called out, keeping his voice friendly but not too loud. He didn't want to startle her. The woman looked up, her eyes wary at first, but then they softened slightly. She nodded. "Yes, please, the cart, it's stuck. I can't get it out." Her voice was calm with a quiet strength behind it. She had an accent John didn't immediately recognize, and there was a resilience in her tone that made him respect her. John jumped down from his truck and walked over. He helped her lift the cart slightly and nudged the wheels. Together, they managed to free it from the sand. The horse seemed relieved and pranced a little as if understanding that it could move again. "You're lucky I was passing by," John said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This part of the road can be tricky." The woman smiled faintly, a small gesture that seemed to carry a lot of gratitude. "I thank you. I didn't know what I would have done if no one came." "Where are you headed?" John asked, curious but careful. He knew that travelers sometimes came from far away and he didn't want to assume anything. "To the settlement," she replied. "It's a few miles ahead." John thought for a moment. The settlement was not too far from his own ranch, but the sun was still high, and it would be a long walk for her with all those bundles. "Hop in," he said finally. "I can give you a ride." The woman hesitated. There was something in her expression that told John she wasn't used to asking for help, but she nodded and stepped into the truck. She settled herself carefully, making sure her belongings were secure. Her clothes were simple but clean, showing that she took pride in herself even in difficult circumstances. As John drove, the desert scenery rolled past in a blur of golden sand and red rocks. The sun cast long shadows across the hills, and the wind picked up, carrying dust that made John squint. They drove in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. John tried to make small talk. "It's hot today." "Not unusual for this time of year, but still," he laughed lightly. "I think I've gotten used to it, though." The woman nodded. "Yes, the desert is beautiful, but it can be unforgiving. I've learned that." Her voice was soft but confident. There was a weight in her words, a history that John sensed but did not fully understand. After a while, he felt a curiosity he couldn't shake. "You don't sound like you're from around here. Where are you from?" She looked out the window for a long moment, as if deciding how much to share. "I come from the Apache lands," she said quietly. "I lived there with my husband, but he passed away. I am traveling now." John's eyes widened slightly. He had heard stories about the Apache people, their rich culture and strong traditions. He had never met someone personally, though, and certainly never someone traveling alone through this harsh land. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. "Thank you," she replied. There was a calmness in her tone, a quiet acceptance that seemed to come from living through hardship. The rest of the ride passed with occasional glances, both studying the landscape and each other. John noticed the careful way she handled herself, the quiet confidence in the way she sat, and the strength that seemed to radiate from her even in the smallest movements. He admired her, though he didn't yet know the full story that lay behind her eyes. When they finally neared the settlement, John slowed down. "Here we are," he said. "This is as far as I can go." The woman looked around, scanning the small cluster of buildings that made up the town. She seemed relieved but also hesitant. "Thank you," she said again. "I appreciate your help," John nodded. "It's no trouble, really, just glad I could help." As she stepped out of the truck, John had no idea that this small act of kindness would bring him into a world he had never imagined, one filled with laws and traditions that were very different from his own. Little did he know, the simple choice to give her a ride would soon lead to a life-changing responsibility and a journey into a culture that demanded respect, understanding, and eventually a connection he had never expected. The woman gathered her bundles and turned back to John, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. There was an unspoken understanding, a recognition of the bond formed in those few miles of travel. He had helped her, yes, but in doing so, he had stepped unknowingly into a story that would shape the rest of his life. And so, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty road, John drove back toward his ranch. He thought about the woman, about her courage and quiet dignity, and about the unexpected paths life sometimes took. At that moment, he could not have imagined how this encounter would unfold, nor the obligations and surprises that awaited him under the laws and customs of the Apache people. The desert was still, the wind whispered through the rocks, and the horizon stretched endlessly before him. John's life, once predictable and solitary, was about to change forever. After dropping the woman off at the small settlement, John drove back toward his ranch with a lot on his mind. The desert looked different now, though the sun was still high and the hills were the same golden brown. Something about the woman lingered in his thoughts. There was a quiet dignity in her eyes that he couldn't forget, and the way she handled herself, even in such difficult circumstances, left a mark on him. By the time John reached his ranch, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. His ranch, with its sprawling fields and scattered cattle, looked peaceful as always, but John's mind was restless. He went about his evening chores with mechanical precision, feeding the cattle and checking fences, but his thoughts kept returning to the woman. Who was she? Why was she traveling alone? And what exactly had he gotten himself involved in by helping her? The next morning, curiosity got the better of him. He decided to ask around in the settlement, hoping to learn more about the woman and the people she came from. He stopped by the general store, where a few locals were chatting about daily life and the weather. John approached the counter and asked casually, "Do you know the woman who came through yesterday? The one with the horse and the cart?" The shopkeeper, a man in his 50s with weathered skin and a calm manner, looked at John carefully. "Ah, you mean Maria." "Yes, she's an Apache widow. Came from the reservation not too far from here. Why do you ask?" John shrugged. "Just curious. I gave her a ride yesterday. I didn't know much about her. She seemed different, strong." The shopkeeper nodded slowly. Different, yes, but strong is a good way to put it. You did well by helping her. Not everyone would stop for a traveler out here. John felt a small sense of pride but also a nagging worry. Different how? He asked. Well, the shopkeeper said, lowering his voice slightly. I don't want to scare you, but there's something you should know. There's a law in the Apache tradition. If a man helps a widow in a significant way, like giving her a ride or aiding her in travel, he's expected to marry her and live with her. It's been that way for generations. John froze. The words didn't make sense at first. He laughed nervously. Marry her. Just because I helped her with a cart. The shopkeeper's face was serious. It's true. It's not just a suggestion. It's about protecting widows. The law ensures that no woman is left alone, especially in difficult times. It may sound strange to outsiders, but it's very important to the community. If you refuse, it could be seen as dishonoring her and the tribe. John rubbed his forehead, feeling a mix of disbelief and worry. He had never heard of such a law before, and the idea of suddenly being expected to marry someone he had just met seemed overwhelming. I don't even know her, he muttered. I only helped her because it seemed like the right thing to do. That's understandable, the shopkeeper said kindly. But customs are customs. You should think carefully. It's not just about marriage. Living with her means becoming part of the community, following their traditions and respecting their ways. It's not something you enter lightly. John left the store with a heavy heart. He wandered along the dusty streets of the settlement, watching children play and women carry baskets of goods. He had always respected tradition, but this was unlike anything he had ever imagined. The law seemed strict, yet he also sensed its purpose. It was about protection, responsibility, and respect. He wondered what Maria herself thought about all this. Did she expect him to comply? Did she want him to? Later that day, John returned to the place where he had left her. He hoped to speak with her and understand her perspective. Maria was outside, tending to her small belongings and the horse. When she saw him approach, she did not seem startled. Instead, there was a quiet acceptance in her gaze, as if she had anticipated this conversation. John, she said softly, I know why you are here. He nodded. I want to understand about the law, about you, about what this means. Maria gestured for him to sit on a nearby bench. The law is not meant to force anyone. It is meant to protect me, yes, but also to ensure that I am not left vulnerable. When my husband passed, the tribe was very clear that a widow cannot be left alone. It is their way of making sure we are cared for, that someone is responsible for our well-being. When you helped me yesterday, you unknowingly took on this responsibility. John was silent for a moment, trying to absorb her words. So, if I refuse, it would be considered dishonorable. Maria shook her head slightly. Not necessarily dishonorable, but it would go against the tradition. The tribe would expect me to be cared for, and you would have been the one chosen to fulfill that role. John leaned back, staring at the horizon. He had never faced anything like this before. His life had been predictable, ranching, caring for his animals and working the land. And now, suddenly, he was being asked to become part of a world he barely understood. The thought was daunting, but he also felt a strange sense of responsibility. He had helped her out of kindness. Could he walk away knowing she might struggle without support? I don't even know you, he said honestly. And now I'm supposed to live with you, marry you. Maria looked at him calmly. I understand your hesitation. You are not alone in feeling this way. But consider this, traditions are not just rules. They are about survival, respect, and trust. You helped me when I needed it. The law simply recognizes that such help is meaningful and carries responsibilities. John ran a hand through his hair, feeling overwhelmed. He had always believed in doing the right thing, but he had never imagined it would lead to such a life-altering decision. I need time to think, he admitted. Of course, Maria said, I will not rush you. But know this, helping someone comes with more than just a moment of kindness. It can change your life in ways you cannot yet see. John spent the next several days wrestling with his thoughts. He spoke with a few trusted neighbors, asking about the traditions of the Apache people, learning about their values, and trying to see the situation from their perspective. He realized that their customs, though unfamiliar, were built on respect, fairness, and protection. They were not meant to trap or punish, but to ensure that widows like Maria were never left alone in a harsh and unforgiving land. He also thought about Maria. He remembered the strength in her eyes, the quiet determination, and the way she had managed her struggles without complaint. There was a dignity about her that he respected deeply. For the first time in a long while, John began to see that this encounter, one he had thought was simple and fleeting, might be the beginning of something much bigger than either of them had imagined. Finally, after several nights of reflection under the stars, John returned to the settlement once again. The desert night was calm, the air cool and clear, and the stars shone brightly above. He found Maria sitting near her horse, watching the sky. "I've thought about it," he said quietly. "I don't fully understand everything yet. I may never fully understand it, but I respect your customs and I respect you. If I am to follow this law, I will do so with honor. I will live with you and I will try to be someone worthy of the trust placed in me." Maria's eyes softened, a faint smile appearing on her lips. "That is all I ask," she said. "Not perfection, not certainty, but respect, understanding, and willingness." "The rest will come with time," John nodded. For the first time, he felt a strange sense of purpose. What had begun as a simple act of kindness was now a decision that could change the course of his life. He did not know what the future held, but he knew that he could not turn away. The responsibility he had unknowingly accepted was now his to honor, and he felt a deep, unshakable determination to do so. As the night deepened and the wind whispered through the desert, John realized that his life, once predictable and solitary, was on the verge of transformation. The encounter with Maria had opened a door to a world of tradition, trust, and unexpected connections. And though the path ahead was uncertain, he felt ready to step forward, guided by respect, courage, and the quiet strength of the woman who had changed his life in ways he could not yet imagine. John woke the next morning with a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. The desert air outside his small ranch house was crisp and clear, with the sun casting long, golden shadows across the fields. He had spent the night thinking about the conversation he had shared with Maria the night before. Her calm strength and quiet confidence had left a lasting impression on him, and though he had never imagined that a simple act of kindness would change his life so profoundly, he felt a deep sense of responsibility. By mid-morning, John made a decision. He packed a few essential belongings in his old leather satchel, mounted his horse, and rode toward the settlement where Maria had stayed. The wind brushed against his face as he rode, carrying with it the scents of the desert, sagebrush, dry earth, and the faint fragrance of wildflowers that had managed to bloom despite the arid land. Every mile he rode, he rehearsed the words he would speak. He wanted to express his sincerity, his willingness to honor her customs, and his desire to make the best of a situation that neither of them had chosen, yet both now had to embrace. When he arrived at the settlement, Maria was outside, preparing the horse for a long journey. She looked up as John approached, her eyes calm but curious. "You came," she said softly, almost as if she had been expecting him. "I did," John replied, dismounting his horse. "I've thought a lot about what we talked about. I don't fully understand all the traditions yet, but I want to respect them, and I want to be someone you can rely on." Maria studied him for a moment, her gaze steady. Then she nodded. "That is enough for now. Actions matter more than words. If you are willing, we will start with small steps, and the rest will come with time." The first days were challenging. John and Maria had very different routines, and learning to live together required patience from both of them. John was used to long hours on the ranch, caring for the cattle and maintaining the land. Maria, on the other hand, had grown up in a structured community with very specific customs and practices. She prepared meals differently, kept her living space organized in ways John had never considered, and observed rituals that were deeply meaningful to her. At first, John found it overwhelming. He would enter the small house to find Maria cooking with a method unfamiliar to him, or arranging her belongings according to tradition, and he felt like an outsider. But he reminded himself that respect was the most important part. He had agreed to this life not because it was easy, but because it was the right thing to do. Maria, too, faced challenges. She had been accustomed to a certain way of life, and now she had to adapt to a man who was entirely unfamiliar with her culture. John's habits, though practical and grounded in the realities of ranch life, often clashed with her ways. He left tools out, rode across the property without consulting her, and occasionally spoke in a blunt manner that startled her. But Maria was patient, understanding that learning each other's habits required time and effort. She also saw the honesty in John's actions, the willingness to try, and the respect he showed for her traditions despite the difficulty. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the desert in shades of gold and pink, John attempted to cook breakfast. Maria watched quietly from the doorway, smiling faintly at his clumsy efforts. He had never been much of a cook, but he wanted to contribute in some way. "I think you're supposed to stir it like this," Maria said, demonstrating gently how to mix the ingredients without spilling them. John followed her instructions carefully, and though the result was far from perfect, it was edible. Maria nodded approvingly. "You are learning." "That is important," John smiled, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. "I'll get better, I promise." Beyond the household tasks, John had to learn more about Maria's customs. She took him to a nearby clearing where the tribe would gather for certain ceremonies, and explained the significance of each ritual. John listened attentively, asking questions, and slowly he began to understand the values behind the traditions. He realized that every custom had a purpose, whether it was to honor ancestors, protect the community, or teach respect and patience. Meanwhile, Maria observed John's work on the ranch. He taught her how to check on the cattle, repair fences, and ride horses safely. Though she was unfamiliar with the ranching lifestyle, she adapted quickly, impressing John with her determination and natural skill. Together, they formed a rhythm, balancing work on the ranch with the practices of her culture. Despite the progress, tensions sometimes arose. One evening, after a long day of tending the cattle, John returned home exhausted. He found Maria arranging the living space according to a specific tradition he did not yet understand. Frustrated and tired, he raised his voice unintentionally. Maria flinched, and a moment of silence fell between them. Realizing his mistake, John stepped closer and spoke softly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to snap. I'm just tired and I'm still learning. I'll try to be more mindful." Maria nodded, her eyes softening. "I understand. We are both learning. Patience is part of life, John. Do not forget that." Over time, these moments of frustration became less frequent. John learned to slow down and observe before acting, and Maria became more flexible in adjusting her practices to accommodate his ways. They discovered that compromise did not mean giving up on their principles, but finding a way for two worlds to coexist peacefully. One afternoon, as they worked together to mend a broken fence along the property line, John paused to wipe the sweat from his brow. He looked at Maria, who was lifting a heavy wooden post with surprising ease. "You know," he said, "I never imagined I'd be doing this, learning your customs, living with someone I barely knew and working side by side every day. But I'm glad. I feel like I'm learning more than I ever thought I could." Maria smiled faintly. "And I too am learning. Life is full of surprises, John. The important part is to embrace them with respect and courage. That is how trust grows." As days turned into weeks, John and Maria began to develop a bond that went beyond mere obligation. They shared small conversations over meals, walked together across the desert at sunset, and helped each other navigate the challenges of a life that combined the ranching world with the traditions of the Apache people. John found himself looking forward to her insights, her quiet wisdom, and the calm presence she brought to his life. Maria, in turn, appreciated his sincerity, hard work, and willingness to learn. The local community began to notice the change as well. Neighbors who had once viewed John as an outsider began to see him as a man of honor and respect. He was not just fulfilling a duty. He was genuinely committed to understanding and supporting Maria, and that commitment earned him a quiet admiration from those around him. One evening, as the desert sky turned a deep indigo and stars dotted the heavens, John and Maria sat by a small fire outside their home. The air was cool, and the wind whispered through the sagebrush. John handed Maria a small cup of water, and they sat in companionable silence, listening to the sounds of the desert at night. "You have changed much in just a few weeks," Maria said softly. "Not in your habits alone, but in your understanding, your patience, and your respect. That is not easy for anyone. I see your heart, John, and I am grateful." John smiled, feeling warmth spread through him. "And you have changed me too. You've taught me more about life, respect, and patience than I could have learned on my own. I think I'm beginning to understand what this life can be, even if it is very different from what I imagined." They sat together, watching the stars reflect on the desert sands, knowing that the journey ahead would not always be simple. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. But they also knew that they were building something rare and meaningful: trust, respect, and the foundations of a life shared between two very different worlds. John had entered Maria's life as a stranger, offering a simple act of kindness. Now, weeks later, he had become a companion, a partner, and a student of a culture he had only begun to understand. Maria, once alone and grieving, had found in John someone willing to walk beside her, not just in the physical sense but in spirit and heart as well. And so, as the fire crackled and the desert night stretched endlessly above them, John and Maria faced the future together. With each passing day, their connection grew, built on patience, learning, and the quiet understanding that life's unexpected turns often led to the most profound and meaningful experiences. In this new chapter of their lives, John realized that marriage, tradition, and responsibility were not merely obligations. They were opportunities to grow, to learn, and to create a life richer than either of them had imagined. And with Maria by his side, he felt ready to meet whatever challenges the desert and life itself might bring. Life settled into a rhythm for John and Maria, but it was not always easy. The first months had been about learning, adjusting, and understanding each other's ways. Now, with routines in place, new challenges began to emerge, ones that tested their patience, their resilience, and the growing connection between them. The ranch, which John had managed alone for years, required constant attention. There were cattle to feed, fences to repair, and water troughs to clean. The heat of the day was relentless, and during particularly dry seasons, the work seemed never-ending. Maria, despite her smaller frame, was a quick learner and strong in spirit. She rose with the sun, helping John with chores, carrying water, feeding the animals, and learning to ride the horses with confidence. John often watched her work and felt admiration he hadn't anticipated. There was a precision and grace in the way she moved, combined with a determination that matched his own. Yet, living together brought moments of tension. Maria's customs sometimes clashed with John's habits, and small misunderstandings could turn into brief arguments. One afternoon, for example, John returned from tending the far fields to find Maria arranging the house according to a traditional Apache practice he did not fully understand. "Why do you always move everything around?" John asked, exasperated, wiping the sweat from his brow. Maria looked at him calmly, her dark eyes steady. "It is a tradition, John. It brings balance and respect to the home. It is important to me, and it is part of the life we are learning to share." John sighed, rubbing his forehead. I know, I never expected this. It feels like I'm always stepping on customs I don't fully understand." Maria softened. "And yet you try. That is what matters. We are not perfect. We are learning. That is the life we have chosen." It took time, but John began to see that compromise did not mean abandoning his own ways. He started observing Maria more closely, asking questions before acting, and taking care to respect her rituals. Likewise, Maria began to allow small adjustments in her practices, realizing that John's methods were rooted in practicality and survival on the ranch. Over time, they created a balance, a way of living that honored both worlds while fostering harmony in their home. Even with this balance, life was not without its challenges. The harsh desert climate could be unforgiving. One summer, a prolonged heat wave caused the water in the troughs to dry up faster than usual. The cattle became restless, and the grass in the pastures turned brown and brittle. John and Maria worked tirelessly, hauling water from a distant well and improvising shade for the animals. By the end of each day, they were exhausted, sunburned, and covered in dust. Yet, even in these trying moments, something remarkable happened. They learned to rely on each other in ways that went beyond chores. Maria learned which cattle were more difficult to handle and how to calm them, while John discovered that her knowledge of local herbs and natural remedies could soothe minor injuries and illnesses among the animals. Together, they became a team, not just sharing responsibilities but complementing each other's strengths. One evening, after a particularly long day, John and Maria sat outside, watching the sun sink behind the distant hills. Their clothes were dusty, their hands scratched and worn from labor, but a sense of satisfaction filled them. "We did well today," John said quietly, looking at Maria. Maria smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the colors of the setting sun. "Yes, we did together." It was moments like these that built their bond. Each shared hardship, each solved problem, each compromise strengthened their connection. They were learning that life was not just about survival, but about understanding, trust, and the quiet satisfaction of facing challenges side by side. Yet, their journey was not only about chores and routines. Social interactions and community expectations added another layer of complexity. Some neighbors were curious, others skeptical, and a few even judgmental. John, an outsider, and Maria, a woman of deep cultural roots, drew attention wherever they went. The local Apache community observed them carefully, measuring John's respect for the customs and his willingness to embrace the responsibilities he had taken on. One day, an elder from the tribe visited their home. She was a small woman with wise, sharp eyes and a presence that commanded respect. She studied John for a long moment before speaking. "You have chosen to live with Maria. You have shown respect, yes, but there is still more to learn. Do not forget that this is not merely about daily chores or words. It is about understanding the heart of our people, honoring the traditions, and living with integrity." John bowed his head respectfully. "I understand. I want to learn. I want to be worthy of this responsibility." The elder nodded, her eyes softening slightly. "Then continue as you have. Observe, listen, and act with patience. That is the path to harmony." Her visit left John with a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his journey was not only about helping Maria, but also about immersing himself in a culture he had barely known. It was a path that demanded humility, respect, and openness, a path that would shape him into a man capable of both love and understanding. Meanwhile, Maria faced her own adjustments. She had to reconcile her grief from losing her husband with the growing connection she felt with John. Though the law had required his presence, she found herself gradually appreciating his companionship, his steady nature, and the genuine effort he put into understanding her world. At night, when the desert winds whispered across the hills, she sometimes reflected on how her life had shifted. What had started as a necessity was evolving into a partnership rooted in trust and mutual respect. The seasons changed, bringing both beauty and challenge. Spring arrived with bursts of wildflowers across the hills, painting the desert in brilliant shades of yellow, purple, and red. The rivers swelled from melting snow in the mountains, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming sage. John and Maria worked tirelessly to prepare the ranch for the season, repairing fences, planting feed crops, and checking on the health of the cattle. During this time, they also spent moments of quiet reflection together. One afternoon, as they walked along a narrow trail overlooking a canyon, John turned to Maria. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought my life could change so completely. I was used to being alone, managing my ranch and thinking my days were predictable. But you've shown me a different way of life, a life with meaning, respect, and connection. I never expected this, and yet I feel grateful." Maria looked at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "Life often surprises us, John. We do not always choose the path we walk, but we can choose how we walk it. You have chosen wisely, and that matters." It was in these quiet moments, away from chores and community expectations, that their bond deepened. They began to share not just responsibilities, but hopes, dreams, and small joys. They laughed together when a calf ran in circles around them, or when the wind blew dust into their eyes. They shared stories of their past, and slowly, the walls built by distance, grief, and unfamiliarity began to fall. One particularly difficult challenge came during a sudden summer storm. The desert, though often dry, could be unpredictable. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, and a heavy downpour fell in minutes, flooding parts of the ranch and making the dirt roads nearly impassable. John and Maria worked together through the rain, securing the animals, tying down loose supplies, and ensuring that nothing was swept away. By the time the storm passed, they were soaked, tired, and muddy, but also exhilarated. Sitting by the fire that evening, drying their clothes and sharing a simple meal, John looked at Maria with a new understanding. "We really do make a good team, don't we?" he said with a small smile. Maria nodded, her expression softening. "Yes. Together, we face what life brings, and together, we grow stronger." Months passed, and life on the ranch became a blend of old and new. John and Maria developed routines that balanced the demands of ranching with the traditions of Apache life. They celebrated ceremonies together, worked the land side by side, and supported each other through challenges both small and large. Through it all, one thing became clear. The unexpected marriage, born of a law neither had fully understood at first, was transforming into a partnership built on respect, trust, and shared purpose. John had become part of Maria's world, and Maria had found in John a steady presence she could rely on. Their lives, once separate and defined by routine, had intertwined, creating something richer, more meaningful, and deeply rewarding. And as the desert sun set behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the ranch, John and Maria knew that life would continue to test them, but that together they were ready. Ready to face challenges, ready to learn, and ready to build a life that honored both the past and the future.